realized that I'm the only person on the planet that knows this audio exists besides the killer. I gotta tell somebody.
This is the first time in my career that I've ever heard a homicide recorded.
Little Falls is in the state of Minnesota on the Mississippi River. Years ago, there was a lot more industry in town than what we have today.
We have lived here for 40 years, about. Like any small town, you get to know quite a few of the people.
It's just a really, really nice place to live. But as far as places for kids to hang out,
For young people, there's not a whole lot in this town outside of school activities.
Halloween used to be a lot of fun for our family.
It's a prank, stop!
The grandkids would dress up in a myriad of different costumes.
Stop! No.
Nick and Haley were best friends besides being cousins. When they got to be teenagers, you rarely saw one without the other.
We're just playing around.
Nick was just an amazing grandson. It's hard to even find pictures of Nick where he doesn't have this big smile on his face. He was very active. He was in sports. He did canoeing. He was up for anything that was fun that kids wanted to do. Haley was involved in sports also. She was on the swim team. She worked a couple jobs and just the usual makeup and boyfriends and whatever.
Nick's mom and her husband, they had their issues, so we very much helped raise him.
Let's go and have some lunch.
They would occasionally do some bonehead things, but for the most part, Nick and Haley were really good kids.
There was somebody beating on my door, and it was Byron.
Byron!
Hi, Bill.
I got to know Byron just as a friendly neighbor. We just connected, and we got along.
Did you see anything strange in the neighborhood today?
No.
And I says, really, Byron, I did not.
Why?
My house just got robbed.
Byron was a high-class man. He loved people. He loved conversation.
I'm grown.
But never got married. He retired from his federal job and moved back to Little Falls in 2009. His passion was that house. When they walk downstairs, everything is tipped over and it's just a total trash.
Oh, man.
He described some of the things that were missing. Cash, silver coins, gold coins, just oodles of things.
My mom's necklace, bracelet, solid gold, my medals.
They stole his guns.
Remember my dad's vintage shotgun and Mini 14 rifle?
And he said to me, this is not the first time it's been robbed.
You call the cops? A deputy came out, he couldn't get any prints.
Ida, his mother, died in July. And then all of a sudden, he was by himself. And it was hard on Byron. It was really, really hard on Byron.
Take it easy. Take it easy.
And he said to me, this is my castle. They should not be coming in here. The man was not happy. He was not happy. After the break-in, Byron was petrified. He would not leave his property because he was afraid something was going to happen. He thought somebody was there breaking into his house again. Byron was a smart man. I'm gonna call him a genius. He worked for the federal government, and he was stationed all over the world. He installed security systems.
All the wiring from upstairs I showed you, here it is.
Byron asked if I would help him put up some security cameras at his house on a Sunday afternoon. It was a brand new system. Every camera had its own screen. He figured anybody that will steal guns will come back and kill him. And he wanted to have proof there for the local law to know what happened.
The day of Thanksgiving, we were really excited. It's a lot of work, but it's always fun.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Nick and Haley were on the way out to Nick's mom and dad's house to get cleaned up, and then Nick, Haley, and Nick's mom and dad were all going to come to our house together, and then we were going to sit down and have our feast.
Before he left my house, he gave me a huge hug and said, "I love you, Grandma."
One of the things that I said to him is, behave.
Byron lived down the street from us. He always came over to our house on Thanksgiving. He was always invited. Except this year, he declined the invitation, which was really odd.
Here we go then.
Our target time for dinner was 1:30, and we were waiting for Nick and Haley.
You guys hungry?
Where are they?
Haley was always connected to her phone.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system.
Not to answer was very unusual,
Nothing.
and there was some bit of irritation for a while. We're waiting. Something's wrong. And I knew Nick would not miss a holiday. I just had a feeling of foreboding. That first night, the kids were missing. It was hard. You're trying to keep yourself from falling apart.
I kept myself busy, but it was on my mind the whole while.
Eventually, I called the sheriff department to see if there was any accident, and we're told they couldn't do a missing persons for 24 hours. You have to think best case scenario. Yes, he's going to show up, and I'm going to say, "Nick, where the heck were you?"
The day after Thanksgiving, I was putting up the Christmas tree and saw a huge van labeled Bureau of Criminal Apprehension go down Elm Street all the way to Byron's home.
I received a call from our office requesting our assistance with a death investigation. When I arrived at the Byron Smith residence on Elm Street, I walked down the stairs into an area that appeared to be very neat and orderly. There was a pool of blood on the bottom of the stairs. Somebody had pulled a rug over to disguise it from initial view.
Sir.
A little distance from the bottom of the stairs, I see a camouflage tarp.
call Byron on his cell, and there was no answer. I thought, oh my gosh, he died.
I pulled back layers of the tarp and see legs and arms. There are two bodies. It was a male and a female, both who appeared to be in their teens.
The door rang, and I knew it wasn't good news. And I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want the words spoken into the air to make it real.
Honey, detectives here.
The officer said, I've got some bad news. Nick is dead. And then said, Haley's dead too.
I was thinking maybe they went off the road and hit something.
They were committing a burglary.
I informed them that Haley and her cousin Nick had done a burglary and that the homeowner had shot them.
I didn't react immediately. It's like my mind couldn't even take it in.
To hear that they had broken into somebody's house with the idea of stealing from that person was just, I couldn't begin to think that Nick and Haley would do something like that. It was just inconceivable.
The homeowner, Byron Smith, had been arrested. I questioned why. Somebody broke into his house.
In the state of Minnesota, we have a law called defensive dwelling. If the homeowner reasonably believes his or her life is in jeopardy,
you have a right to use deadly force to protect your property and yourself in your home.
Okay. Byron, before we ask you any questions, you must understand what your rights are. You have the right to remain silent. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand that?
I understand that, and I waive that considering the circumstances.
Byron didn't exercise his right to remain silent or have an attorney present. Does it make my job more difficult? Yes. Much more difficult.
No, you told me that your house had just been broken into. Can you tell me about that?
For the past month, my life has been very unhappy. I felt very threatened inside my own home. I was in the basement in my favorite reading chair reading a paperback. It's a very quiet house. And I hear someone rattling the upstairs door. This is wrong. And I see a shadow go past the window. Then somebody's rattling the basement door trying to get in. I see the shadow trying to see what they can see inside. I'm sitting there hoping they go away. And I hear a glass window broken.
Okay.
I'm getting seriously stressed because somebody wants in, and it's happened before. And in the past couple of weeks, I've gotten into the habit of carrying my guns with me. And I hear the steps go down the hallway, turn around, and come down the stairs.
We know that Byron's home had been broken into and guns were missing.
I figure they're willing to use guns if they steal guns. And I decide that I've got a choice of either shooting or being shot. And after I shot him, I just wanted to calm down more than anything else. And maybe, it's hard to judge the time, 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. I was just sitting there with the blood pounding in my ears. I hear more footsteps coming down the hallway, and somebody else starts down the stairs.
The other person's got a hood around their face. I don't think he knew it was a girl or her age. He followed the confines of the law. It's too bad, after the fact,
Obviously, our victims aren't able to provide a story of what happened. We're using forensics to either prove whether that matched the accounts provided by Byron Smith, or if Byron Smith was telling us a story that wasn't true.
There are 4 outdoor cameras placed around the house. Because of my previous training in such matters, I believe in having a system that's concealed as well as practical.
We learned from Mr. Smith that those cameras were recording onto a hard drive in his workroom. We took possession of the hard drive, an audio recorder, and various items of electronics. And we brought them to Bemidji to our regional office so that Special Agent Nelson could download the data.
Pretty much every kind of media that was available was in that room. Hard drives, compact flash cards, memory sticks, plus audio recorders as well. I took the DVR, hooked it up to a monitor, and I just started looking on there for anything that would tell me what happened at the scene. I saw a figure darting up to the house. His behavior didn't look like a person who was there to make a social call. He's not knocking on the door, he's trying the door. And that turned out subsequently to be Nick Brady.
The footage of the surveillance system backed up what Mr. Smith was telling the detective. Nick and Haley broke into Mr. Smith's house to burglarize him. Based upon some text messages that we were able to get from each victim's phone, it appeared to us that Nick and his friends had been doing burglaries and that they picked Mr. Smith's house because one of his friends had done work for Mr. Smith and knew that Mr. Smith had a lot of belongings.
they saw his home as an easy target. They're thieves.
When I heard that Nick had supposedly broken into another house prior to the Smith house, I was disappointed. I was shocked.
I would have wanted to just take him and shake him and say, what the heck do you think you're doing? You know better than this. This is not how you were raised.
We're thinking that this is a pretty cut and dry case. Is it reasonable to shoot somebody who's broken into your house? Definitely. It's based on the circumstances, but we're still putting the pieces of the puzzle together. We have investigated several shootings where somebody breaks into a house. In all of those cases, the frantic 911 calls are typically, somebody is breaking into my house, send law enforcement right away. In this case, Mr. Smith didn't call law enforcement, his neighbor did.
The day after Thanksgiving, Byron called, and he said, Bill, can I ask a favor of you? Could you possibly find a lawyer to come down here and talk to me? I felt it was serious. And so I called the sheriff's department.
For some reason, we were dispatched to the scene a full 24 hours after an apparent home invasion. 2 bodies had been in the basement for a full day.
I have to ask, Byron, after the shooting, why didn't you call law enforcement to report what happened?
For the first couple hours, I was just shaking. And I gradually shifted into worrying about another accomplice. There'd already been 2. And I was pretty much afraid to do anything. An hour later, I had this screwball thought that just because my Thanksgiving screwed up, I don't need to screw up yours.
Okay.
For us, that is an alarming statement. That is inconsistent with most of the home invasion type shooting investigations that I've been involved in.
I represent innocent people all the time. They don't always answer the questions the right way. And that's exactly what happened here.
We were continuing to do our investigation. I'm looking at the initial autopsy. We're drawn to the observation that both teenagers died of multiple gunshot wounds. Nick had 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to his body and then 1 to his temple. We also observed a wound to the back of his hand. It appeared that he'd been shot through the hand. The bullet came back out the palm and into his temple. Haley had 6 wounds, 2 to her body, 1 to her right thumb, and then she was shot in the left eye, under her chin, and behind her left ear.
My question, Byron, is why did you shoot again? I assumed she had a gun.
Good.
It jammed, and when the gun clicked, misfired, she laughed at me. I just pulled out the .22. And shot her and shot her. And yes, I fired more shots than I needed to.
It's a moment of seconds where he is immediately trying to protect himself from being killed in his own home. He is scared.
After reviewing Byron Smith's statement to the detectives, we continued to search the house for any firearms to determine if the 2 intruders brought something into the house with them. We found the firearms that Mr. Smith told us he'd used to shoot Nick and Haley. We found some other firearms in the residence that Mr. Smith said were his. We weren't able to find any firearms that Nick and Haley brought in when they broke into Byron Smith's house.
The kids had no weapons on them, none whatsoever. Not even so much as a pocket knife.
My job was to look at the evidence. I went back to the beginning of the video and started viewing it all the way through just to see what else was there. Earlier on Thanksgiving Day, I saw Mr. Smith leave the house. get into the silver pickup truck that was in the driveway, and he left. Nothing unusual about that. But about 20 minutes later, I saw him walking back to the house on foot from a different direction. Kind of struck me as odd. Where did the truck go? Why did he do that? I was pretty much done with what I could do with that video. And by that time, it was after hours, and I wanted to get to that audio recorder and get it out of the way. Never thought I was going to find anything on it that was worth hearing. There was 7 files. They were all pretty short, except for one of them. That one was 6 hours and 24 minutes long. I opened that one up in my audio software, and I saw mostly very little sound. It had a flat line on the waveform. But there were a few places where there were big spikes, like a lot of sound. So I put my cursor in front of one of the spikes and hit play. Couldn't have been more surprised. Probably the most extraordinary piece of evidence I'd ever find in my career. I just sat there for a while and took it all in because, it was a pretty awful thing to hear. I thought for a few minutes and realized that right now I'm the only person on the planet that knows this exists besides the killer. I gotta tell somebody.
Later that night, Janet called me and said, "You need to return to the office here. You need to listen to this audio."
What have you got?
She pushes play.
Still amazes me how clear that is.
You're dead. As Janet Nelson and I are listening to this audio, I begin to realize that this is the first time in my career that I've ever heard a homicide recorded.
We heard a female voice say, "Nick." It was like hearing a ghost.
In my head, I'm imagining Haley walking down the stairs. When listening to the audio, you hear so much more. You hear all the events surrounding what occurred. You hear the anger, the emotion.
You're dying. You okay?
I kind of wish I could unhear it, but my job is to listen to the audio to process the evidence, and that's what we were doing.
The recording device was put there for a reason. He thought if he was killed, murdered in his own home, the police could use that to get the killers.
Take it back to the beginning.
We together listened to the audio of the several minutes before the shooting itself.
Bruce, stop by tomorrow morning. No rush, but as soon as convenient. Can you do that?
We heard him talking like he was on a phone.
Park 100 yards north of the corner and walk in from the west.
Bruce Smith is Byron's brother. We reviewed Byron's phone records from Thanksgiving, and he never called anyone during that time.
And then we realized he was just talking to himself.
I realize I don't have an appointment, but I would like to see one of the lawyers here.
It's kind of like he was rehearsing what he was going to say to somebody.
In your left eye.
I have no idea why he said, "in your left eye." It didn't make sense until I remembered looking at the injury to Haley's left eye. She'd been shot in the left eye. And he says this on the recording several minutes before Nick and Haley are at his house. Those three statements indicated to us that he expected something to happen, where someone would be shot in the left eye, and that he would need the assistance of his brother and a lawyer.
He's focusing on, I'm gonna shoot that person in her left eye. That, my friend, is premeditation.
In your left eye.
This was a 5,000-piece puzzle, all painted to picture a premeditation. Byron Smith is absolutely obsessed that somebody might break in his house again. And that obsession drove him to make all kinds of steps in preparation for this.
An hour before the shooting itself, Byron Smith moves his truck. He returns back as if he hid the truck to make it appear that he was gone for Thanksgiving.
And it did look like no one was home. And that's how he enticed these kids to go in. I likened it to a guy that deer hunts. They get in what's called a deer stand, and they wait for the deer to come by, and then they shoot and kill it. He's ready, and he's waiting. It just so happens Nick Brady and Haley Kiefer are on their way to Grandpa and Grandma's. And the boy was a burglar. He had broken into houses before. We know that. I'm sure he looked at the house, no truck in the driveway, and figured this will be an easy thing. I'll smash a window, I'll grab some things. We'll be at Grandma and Grandpa's in no time.
I'll be right back. Keep a lookout.
Okay.
Nick Brady walked all the way around his house, and Smith saw him on his video cameras. And Smith had a working telephone right next to him. All he had to do was pick it up and dial 911, but he chose not to. Nick is on the floor, dying. There's clearly no threat.
You're dead.
The third shot was an assassination.
Hey, what's up? I gotcha. You know the drill. Speak after the beep.
Nick, what are you doing? Hurry up.
You hear the rustling of the tarp. You hear the dragging of a body.
The guy thought everything. The blood and brain matter on the floor, he put a rug over it, so when the next person comes down, they wouldn't see the floor and go, oh, I guess I won't come down there. It sounded like Smith was running water and washing his hands. I believe he looked out the window and saw Haley coming over.
Mr. Smith didn't tell us. He ran back down the stairs and positioned himself and waited for Kiefer to walk down the stairs.
Haley wasn't about to burglarize. She went looking for her cousin.
I could hear him breathing. And I could hear a lot of metallic sounds, like he was working the action on the gun. You know, he was getting ready.
He shoots her, and he hits her in the left arm. The rifle jammed after the first shot. He makes a comment.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's great sarcasm. Sorry I missed, ha ha ha.
Oh, yeah.
She wasn't laughing. All I heard was a young girl screaming, crying for help, for forgiveness. Please don't shoot me.
You're dying.
He shot her a .22 bullet right in her left eye, just as he had said some minutes before. She was out. But what did he do? He picked her up by the hair and shot her right in the back of the neck, blowing away her brain stem.
Bitch.
Byron Smith never told the detective that he referred to Haley Kiefer as a bitch.
And then that still wasn't enough. He puts the revolver up under her chin and shoots her in the head.
I thought she was dead, and it turned out she wasn't.
Okay.
And as much as I hate someone, I don't believe they deserve pain. So I gave her a finishing shot under the chin, up into the cranium.
Okay.
And she gave out the death twitch. First time I've ever seen it in a human, but it works the same in beaver and deer and whatever.
I'm safe now.
Periodically, he would talk to himself over the course of the next few hours.
I don't see them as human. I see them as vermin. Social mistakes, social problems. I refuse to live in fear.
I didn't hear any fear out of his voice. Not while he murdered the kids, not after he murdered the kids. Never heard any fear.
I think for me, the worst part of the trial was the enhanced audio tape. To be that cold and that callous over human life, especially my grandson, you know, and this 18-year-old young lady who was pleading for her life, and then to call her a bitch and shoot her with a nice, clean finishing shot. Give me a break.
Mr. Smith got the benefit of a trial, and in the state of Minnesota, there is no death penalty for murder, which he committed. But he wanted these children to have the death penalty for theft. He became the judge, the jury, and the executioner. It's just evil.